In the grand combat arena of the Galactic Military Summit, alien General Stratus stands before thousands of delegates from warrior civilizations across 6 galaxies, showcasing his prize student, an 8-foot killing machine named Vortex, who has never lost a match. The arrogant general issues his infamous challenge, "Who among your pathetic species can defeat my perfect warrior?" To everyone's shock, a small human female named Captain Lyra calmly raises her hand. What follows is a masterclass in human unpredictability that will forever change how the galaxy views Earth's inhabitants. The story unfolds from the bewildered perspective of General Stratus himself, who learns the hard way that evolution's strangest creations often make the deadliest survivors. I am General Stratus of the Velkari Empire, and I have conquered 47 star systems without losing a single major engagement. My scales shimmer with the purple hue of royalty. My 4 arms have crushed the skulls of lesser beings, and my reputation precedes me like the shockwave of a dying sun. So naturally, when the Galactic Military Summit rolled around this cycle, I was invited to demonstrate exactly why my species sits at the apex of martial excellence. The summit itself was held on Corvan Prime, a neutral world that smelled vaguely of sulfur and disappointment. Thousands of delegates packed the grand arena, a massive structure that could house 50 warships if you stacked them properly. The Thoraxians were there, clicking their mandibles in that annoying way they do. The Zelkron delegation took up an entire section with their gelatinous bulk, oozing confidence they absolutely did not deserve. Even the Corin showed up, those 6-legged cowards who hadn't won a war since the Bronze Age of their pathetic civilization. And then there were the humans. Oh, those humans. Sitting in the back corner like they were attending a particularly boring lecture on fuel efficiency. About 30 of them, looking unremarkable in every possible way. Soft skin, dull teeth, no claws, no armor plating, no venom sacs. They looked like they'd evolved specifically to lose at survival. I had done my homework, of course. Earth, 3rd planet from an unremarkable star. Inhabitants barely worthy of the term sentient. They'd only achieved faster-than-light travel 6 cycles ago, which in galactic terms made them the equivalent of toddlers playing with plasma grenades. But I digress. I was here to make a point. "Esteemed delegates," I announced, my voice amplified across the arena, each syllable dripping with the authority of someone who has never been wrong about anything, ever. "I stand before you today to demonstrate the pinnacle of combat training, the perfection of warrior discipline, the absolute superiority of Velkari military doctrine." I gestured dramatically with my upper right arm, and the arena floor opened. From below rose my masterpiece, my greatest achievement, my student, Vortex. 8 feet of pure killing potential stepped into the light. Vortex's exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian, his 6 limbs moved with mechanical precision, and his 3 eyes scanned the crowd with the cold calculation of a predator who had never known defeat. I had trained him personally for 10 cycles, drilled every combat form into his neural pathways until perfection became his default state. He had fought in 217 matches across 40 different worlds against 63 different species. His record, 217 victories, 0 defeats, 0 draws. Several of his opponents hadn't even survived to be humiliated by their loss. "Behold," I proclaimed, spreading all 4 arms wide in a gesture of supreme confidence that I'd practiced in the mirror for weeks. "Vortex, undefeated champion of the Velkari Combat Academy, master of 17 fighting styles, victor against every worthy opponent the galaxy has offered. His reflexes are 0.3 seconds faster than any species average. His strike force exceeds 12,000 pounds per square inch. His tactical processing allows him to predict enemy movements 0.7 seconds before they occur." The crowd murmured appreciatively. The Thoraxians clicked louder. Even the Zelkron stopped oozing for a moment, which I took as their version of impressed silence. I allowed myself a smile, showing all 47 of my teeth. "And now I issue a challenge to all of you gathered here. Send forth your best warrior, your finest soldier, your most decorated champion. Let them face Vortex in single combat, and let us determine once and for all which species truly deserves to call themselves warriors. The arena fell silent. You could have heard a scale drop. The Thoraxian High Commander shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly very interested in the architectural details of the ceiling. The Zelkron delegation began a hushed conversation among themselves, their translucent forms rippling with what I recognized as cowardice. The Koran representatives actually started filing toward the exits, which was honestly just sad. I savored the moment. This was the taste of absolute dominance, the sweet nectar of, "I'll do it." The voice came from the human section. 2 words delivered in a tone so casual, you'd think someone had just volunteered to fetch drinks, not face certain dismemberment in ritual combat. My 3 primary eyes swiveled toward the source of this audacious stupidity, and I felt my victory smile widen into something truly predatory. This was going to be even better than I'd planned. The human who stood up was female. I noted with what I can only describe as delighted disbelief. The species already looked like they'd been designed by a committee that ran out of good ideas halfway through, and this particular specimen exemplified their biological mediocrity. Captain Lyra, as her uniform indicated, stood maybe 5.5 feet tall. For reference, that's approximately the height of a Velkari child in their 3rd molt. She had brown hair pulled back in some sort of functional arrangement, skin the color of lightly toasted grain, and absolutely zero visible weapons, armor plating, or natural defenses of any kind. Her arms were thin, her frame looked like it would snap in a strong breeze, and her teeth, visible when she smiled politely at my student, were flat and pathetic, clearly designed for chewing vegetation like some sort of ambulatory garden pest. I let out a laugh that echoed across the arena, a sound that had historically preceded the destruction of enemy fleets. "You, a human volunteers. Oh, this is rich. This is absolutely magnificent." My second in command, Major Kale, leaned over from his position beside my throne. "General, perhaps we should..." "Should what?" I cut him off, waving a dismissive hand. "Deny this creature her death wish. That would be cruel, Kale. No, no. Let the soft thing have her moment of misguided bravery. It will serve as an excellent lesson to her species about knowing one's place in the galactic hierarchy." Captain Lyra walked toward the arena floor with an easy stride, like she was heading to a cafeteria, not a combat zone. She wasn't even limbering up. The Thoraxians began chittering among themselves, and I caught fragments of their discussion. "Death wish. Humans are stranger than we thought. Notify their embassy." Within seconds, the betting pools erupted across the arena. The Zelkron started it, as they always did, those opportunistic blobs. I watched the odds flash across the holographic displays. Vortex was favored at 99.7 to 1. The 0.7 was probably someone's misclick. 10,000 credits on Vortex, first blood within 30 seconds, announced Ambassador Zenith of the Kryn Collective, his crystalline form refracting light as he transferred funds. 20,000, total victory in under 1 minute, countered High Commander Soren of the Thoraxian fleet. The humans in the back corner weren't betting, they were just watching. A few of them had pulled out what looked like recording devices. One was eating something from a small package, crunching audibly. The lack of concern on their faces was almost insulting. Did they not understand what was about to happen to their representative? I settled back into my throne, already composing the speech I'd give after Vortex's inevitable victory. Something about human hubris. Perhaps a philosophical observation about species knowing their limitations. Maybe I'd even be magnanimous and allow them to retrieve her body afterward. Intact bodies were sometimes hard to guarantee with Vortex. He had a tendency to get enthusiastic. "Major Kale," I said, not bothering to hide my amusement, "make sure the medical team is standing by. I suspect they'll need to collect the remains with a sponge and a bucket when this is over." Captain Lyra reached the combat circle, rolled her shoulders once, and smiled up at Vortex with the kind of expression you'd give a mildly interesting museum exhibit. This was going to be over so fast. I almost felt sorry for her. The arena's combat circle illuminated with the traditional blue energy field, a barrier designed to contain the violence and protect the spectators from stray limbs or other biological debris. The referee, a neutral Calvaxian, who'd overseen 10,000 matches without incident, floated to the center on his anti-gravity platform. Combatants, acknowledge the rules. He droned in that perpetually bored tone his species had perfected. No weapons beyond natural biological capabilities, no outside interference, match ends at surrender, incapacitation or death. Do you understand? Vortex slammed one of his primary fists into the ground, cracking the reinforced floor plating. The impact echoed like thunder, his three eyes blazing with predatory focus. It was his signature pre-match intimidation display, one that had caused 17 previous opponents to forfeit on the spot. Captain Lyra said, "Yep, got it," and then proceeded to do something that made my upper left eye twitch involuntarily. She started stretching. Not battle preparation, not a combat stance, stretching. The kind of gentle, casual movement you'd do before a light jog or perhaps some recreational activity. She bent at the waist, touched her toes, held it for a moment, then straightened and rolled her neck with a series of small pops that the arena's audio sensors picked up and amplified. Is she mocking him?" Major Kale whispered beside me. "She can't be," I replied, though doubt crept into my voice like an unwelcome guest. "She's too stupid to understand the situation she's in." Vortex, to his credit, maintained his stance. But I could see the confusion in the slight tilt of his head. In 10 cycles of training, we'd covered every possible opponent behavior: aggression, fear, desperation, tactical retreat positioning. Nowhere in our extensive combat database was there an entry for casual stretching routine, as if preparing for senior citizen yoga class. The referee initiated the countdown. Combat begins in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, engage. Vortex launched himself forward with the speed of a railgun projectile, all 6 limbs working in perfect synchronization, closing the 20-foot distance in 0.8 seconds. His opening move was a classic Velkari triple strike combination: high feint with the upper arms, actual strike with the middle limbs, sweep with the lower appendages. It had a 97% success rate against opponents who'd never faced it before. Captain Lyra wasn't there. Not because she'd dodged with impressive speed. Not because she'd countered with some brilliant defensive maneuver. She'd simply taken 3 steps to the left, at a walking pace, like she was avoiding a puddle on a sidewalk. Vortex's strikes hit empty air with enough force to create a small shockwave. He recovered instantly, spun, and struck again. Side strike, overhead smash, leg sweep combination. Lyra leaned backward, let the first strike pass, ducked under the second, and hopped over the third with a little skip that looked almost playful. "What is she doing?" I demanded, leaning forward in my throne. "What kind of combat form is that?" Major Kale consulted his tactical display, running her movements through our military database. "General, the computer can't identify her fighting style. It's not matching any known martial arts discipline from any catalogued species." In the arena, Vortex pressed his attack, increasing speed and ferocity. 20 strikes in 5 seconds, each one capable of shattering bone, pulverizing organs, ending lives. Captain Lyra avoided them all with movements that seemed to violate every principle of efficient combat motion. She swayed, she sidestepped, she did this bizarre little twirl at one point that served no tactical purpose whatsoever, except to not be where Vortex's fist was. And then she did something that made my blood run cold. She smiled. Not a grimace of effort, not a snarl of aggression, a genuine, almost friendly smile, like she was enjoying herself. "Major Kale," I said slowly, watching this impossible creature dance around my perfect student, "did anyone actually research how humans survive to achieve space travel?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. We'd made a mistake. Possibly a very, very large one. 2 minutes into the match, Vortex had thrown over 300 strikes. His success rate, 0. His visible frustration level, catastrophic. Captain Lyra, meanwhile, had thrown exactly 0 strikes. She was simply not getting hit. And worse, she was talking. You know, you telegraph your right upper strike really obviously, she said, conversationally, swaying away from another devastating blow. It's the shoulder dip. You do this little thing with your third joint right before you commit. Vortex roared, a sound that had once made an entire battalion of Kryn warriors drop their weapons and flee. He launched into his most advanced combination, the 17 falls of Velcros, a sequence so complex it required 12 seconds of continuous assault with no repeated movements. Lyra avoided it while apparently thinking about something else entirely. Also, I'm not trying to be rude, but are those joints properly hydrated? You might want to check with your medical team because that clicking sound on your lower left limb seems concerning. I gripped the arms of my throne hard enough to leave permanent impressions. What is happening? Someone explain to me what is happening right now. Major Kale was frantically scrolling through data on his tablet. General, I've pulled up Earth files. Their planet is classified as a death world, class 9 out of 10. Impossible, I snapped. Look at them. They're soft. They have no natural defenses. That's what I thought too, sir. But listen to this. He started reading, his voice taking on a quality of mounting horror. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They don't chase prey by being faster. They chase prey until it dies of exhaustion. Their average endurance is, General, this can't be right. It says they can run for hours, plural, hours. In the arena, Vortex was beginning to slow. Not much, but enough that my trained eye could spot it. His strikes were 0.03 seconds slower. His footwork was fractionally less precise. Captain Lyra looked exactly as fresh as when she'd started. She yawned. Actually yawned. The crowd's reaction had shifted from bloodthirsty anticipation to confused murmuring. The Thoraxians had stopped clicking entirely, which in their species indicated either deep thought or existential crisis. The Zelkron were rippling in patterns I'd never seen before, which their ambassador later told me translated roughly to what the actual hell. Then Lyra did something that would haunt my nightmares for cycles to come. She patted Vortex on the shoulder. Mid-combat, she reached out, casually avoided his counterstrike, and gave him a friendly pat like you'd give a colleague who tried their best at a difficult task. "Hey, you're doing great," she said, with apparently genuine encouragement. "Seriously, your form is excellent. I can tell you've trained really hard." Vortex froze. His combat algorithms literally could not process this input. Friend, foe, threat, non-threat, the categories were breaking down. "Oh no," Major Kale whispered, still reading from his tablet. "Oh no, no, no. General, there's a section here about something called pack bonding. Humans will form emotional attachments to anything, literally anything. Their planet has documented cases of them bonding with plants, inanimate objects, and creatures actively trying to kill them. So, I demanded, though I felt the first tendrils of real concern wrapping around my brain. So she's trying to make friends with him. During combat. It's a psychological attack we have no defense against." I watched in growing horror as Captain Lyra continued her bizarre assault of friendliness. "You know what? I bet you're tired. We've been going for a bit. You want to take a breather? I'm good to pause if you need it." The other humans in the stands were nodding approvingly. One of them called out, "Good sportsmanship, Captain." Another one gave a thumbs up, whatever that meant. Ambassador Zenith of the Kryn Collective leaned over from his seat. "General Stratus, I wish to alter my bet. Is it too late to switch to the human?" "She hasn't landed a single strike," I protested weakly. "Exactly," Zenith replied, his tone suggesting I was missing something fundamental. "And your student looks like he's having a mental breakdown." It was true. Vortex stood in the center of the ring, all 6 limbs twitching slightly, his 3 eyes blinking in an asynchronous pattern that indicated severe cognitive dissonance. A warrior's mind, confronted with kindness in the middle of battle, the ultimate confusion. Captain Lyra stretched again, still smiling. "Ready for round 2 when you are, buddy." Buddy. She'd called my perfect killing machine buddy. I had trained Vortex to face any warrior in the galaxy, but I had never, in my worst tactical nightmares, prepared him to face weaponized friendship. 4 minutes and 17 seconds into the match, Captain Lyra stopped moving defensively. She planted her feet, rolled her shoulders one final time, and said something that made my secondary heart skip a beat. "Okay, I think I've got your pattern now. Thanks for the demonstration." Pattern? I scoffed, though my voice lacked conviction. Vortex doesn't have patterns. He has 17 different combat styles with 4,326 possible combinations. There is no pattern. Major Kale's face had gone pale, which for a Velkari meant his scales had faded to a sickly lavender. "General, she's been studying him. This whole time, she wasn't just dodging. She was learning." Learning what? How to lose more efficiently. Then Captain Lyra moved, and the entire tactical situation inverted like a collapsing star. She didn't just dodge Vortex's next strike. She redirected it, used his own momentum against him, sent him stumbling 2 steps to the left. Before he could recover, she was inside his guard, moving with sudden purpose. She struck his third joint, the exact one she'd mentioned earlier, and the clicking sound became a pop. Vortex's lower left limb buckled. "You see," Lyra said, her tone almost apologetic as she danced away from his retaliatory strike, "humans aren't really built for straight-up fights. We're persisters, stalkers. We watch, we wait, we figure out the weakness, and then we exploit it until our prey gives up." She struck again, same joint, precise as a surgical laser. Vortex roared in pain and fury. "Our ancestors used to chase animals for days," she continued, avoiding his increasingly desperate attacks. "Not because we were faster, because we wouldn't stop. We'd track them through heat, through terrain that would kill most species, through their own exhaustion, and eventually the prey would just give up." I felt something I hadn't experienced in 47 successful campaigns, genuine fear. "She's not trying to overpower him," I breathed, finally understanding. "She's dismantling him, methodically." Major Kale nodded grimly. "Humans don't fight with their bodies, General. They fight with their minds. They adapt. They learn. They turn their opponent's strength into weakness." In the arena, Captain Lyra had shifted from passive defense to active deconstruction. Every strike she made was targeted at the weaknesses she'd spent 4 minutes cataloging. The slight favor Vortex had for his right side, the micro-hesitation before his overhead strikes, the compensatory shift when his lower limb took weight. She wasn't stronger. She wasn't faster. She was smarter, and she'd been patient enough to gather all the data she needed before acting. Vortex, my perfect student, my undefeated champion, was being taken apart like a machine by someone who'd read the instruction manual. "They're pursuit predators," I whispered, watching my certainty of victory crumble with each precise strike Lyra delivered. "Not because they're the strongest, because they're too stubborn to quit and too smart to fight fair." The crowd had gone silent. Even the Thoraxians, who'd seen 1,000 battles, watched with something approaching awe and horror mixed together. Captain Lyra caught Vortex's primary strike, twisted, and used leverage physics that shouldn't work on someone her size. His massive frame shifted, balance disrupted. "Oh no," I said aloud, the words escaping before I could stop them. Major Kale looked at me. "Sir?" "Oh no," I repeated, because those were the only words that captured the full scope of our miscalculation. "They're all like this, aren't they? All the humans." The silence from my aide told me everything. We'd underestimated them, catastrophically. 6 minutes and 42 seconds into what was supposed to be a 30-second demonstration of Velkari superiority, Captain Lyra made her final move. It wasn't a devastating strike. It wasn't some secret human martial arts technique passed down through generations. It was somehow even worse than that. She tripped him. Vortex, 8 feet of engineered combat perfection, undefeated champion of 217 matches, went down because a 5.5-foot human stuck her leg out at precisely the right moment and let physics do the rest. He crashed to the arena floor with a sound like a cargo ship hitting pavement. The impact actually registered on the facility's seismic sensors. I checked later. Before he could rise, Captain Lyra was on his back, her arm around his primary neck ridge in what the humans apparently call a chokehold, applying pressure to the exact neural cluster she'd probably identified in minute 2 of the match. "Tap out," she said, not unkindly. "You fought well, but this is over. Tap out, and we can both walk away from this." Vortex struggled for exactly 4.3 seconds before his body's automatic preservation protocols overrode his warrior's pride. The universal sign of submission. The arena erupted, but not with the cheers I'd expected. It was pandemonium of the confused variety. The Thoraxians were clicking in patterns that translated to various forms of what just happened. The Zelkron delegation had apparently liquefied from shock, forming puddles on their seats. Ambassador Zenith was frantically collecting his winnings from the betting pool with an expression of smug vindication. I sat frozen on my throne, all 4 arms gripping the armrests, my 3 eyes locked on the impossible scene before me. My student, my masterpiece, my proof of Velkari supremacy, was yielding to a creature that looked like it had been designed as a joke by a deity with a broken sense of humor. Captain Lyra released Vortex and stood, offering him a hand up. He stared at it for a long moment, confusion still written across his features, before accepting. She pulled him to his feet with surprising strength, and actually gave him another pat on the shoulder. "You're a fantastic fighter," she said earnestly. "Seriously, that 17 falls combination? Beautiful technique. I'll probably have bruises tomorrow from how close some of those came." Vortex looked at me, his 3 eyes asking a question I had no answer for. The humans in the back section were packing up their belongings with the casual energy of people whose expectations had been met exactly. One of them called out, "Good job, Captain. Drinks are on you tonight." Another was already uploading footage to what I later learned was their version of the Galactic data network. Major Kale touched my shoulder, his hand trembling slightly. "General, you should see this. The match footage is already spreading across 37 systems. There's a human phrase trending in the translations. It says, 'Held my beer, watch this.'" "That doesn't even make sense," I muttered. "None of this makes sense, sir." I watched as the referee, still looking bewildered, raised Captain Lyra's hand in victory. The holographic displays around the arena updated her record, 1 fight, 1 win. Vortex's previously perfect record now showed 217 wins, 1 loss, to a human. The Galactic Military Summit, which had been scheduled to continue for 3 more days of demonstrations and tactical discussions, effectively ended right there. Every species representative was suddenly very busy updating their threat assessment files on Earth. The Thoraxian High Commander was already on his communicator, ordering revised contact protocols. Even the cowardly Quarin, who tried to leave earlier, was scrambling back to take notes. Captain Lyra walked toward the exit, waving politely to the crowd like she'd just finished a pleasant afternoon activity, not dismantled the galaxy's understanding of combat effectiveness. I realized with growing dread that this footage would be studied in military academies across 6 galaxies for generations. The day humanity announced itself not as weaklings to be dismissed, but as something far more terrifying. Clever persistence wrapped in soft skin and friendly smiles. Protocol demanded that I, as the challenger, acknowledge the outcome publicly. I descended from my throne with all the enthusiasm of someone walking toward their own execution, my 4 arms hanging limply at my sides, my scales having lost their regal shimmer somewhere around the moment my student tapped out. The press section had materialized like scavengers around fresh prey, recording devices pointed at me from every angle. I cleared my throat, tasted bitter defeat for the first time in my military career, and spoke the words that would define my legacy in all the worst ways. Captain Lyra of Earth has defeated my student in fair combat. Humanity has proven themselves worthy of respect. Each word felt like swallowing broken glass. I may have been premature in my assessment of their capabilities. The understatement of the galactic cycle, and everyone knew it. A Thoraxian reporter clicked forward, antennae twitching with barely suppressed glee. General Stratus, do you have any comment on the tactical approach Captain Lyra employed? Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't make me sound like a complete fool, Captain Lyra herself stepped up to the press cluster, still looking like she'd just finished a light workout rather than rewriting interstellar combat theory. "Oh, I should probably clarify something," she said, with that same easy smile that I now recognized as the expression of an apex predator pretending to be harmless. "I'm not even a combat specialist. I'm an engineer, propulsion systems mostly. I just do hand-to-hand training twice a week to stay in shape." The silence that followed could have suffocated stars. "You're an engineer?" I heard myself ask, my voice climbing to a pitch I didn't know I could produce. "Yeah, I mostly work on engine calibrations, but back home pretty much everyone does some kind of combat training. You know, just in case." She shrugged, like this was the most normal thing in the universe. "It's kind of a human thing. We prepare for problems we don't have yet." Major Kale had pulled up more Earth files, his face growing more horrified with each line he read. "General, their military doctrine is designated as organized chaos. They have a saying, no plan survives contact with the enemy, so they train their soldiers to improvise, adapt, and overcome. They don't follow rigid combat forms. They make it up as they go based on whatever works." "That's insane," I protested. "That's not military doctrine. That's barely controlled anarchy." "Sir, they have another saying." Kale's voice had gone flat with shock. "If it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid." A human journalist, one of the few embedded with the Earth delegation, raised her recording device. "General Stratus, now that you've seen human capabilities firsthand, how does this change the Velkari Empire's relationship with Earth?" I looked at Captain Lyra, who was now discussing propulsion theory with a Zelkron scientist like the past 10 minutes hadn't happened. I looked at the other humans who'd gone back to their casual conversations and snacking. I looked at Vortex, my perfect student, who was sitting at the edge of the combat circle, looking like he was reconsidering his entire existence. "It changes everything," I admitted, the words heavy with implications I was only beginning to understand. "We will be updating our threat assessment of Earth from negligible to significant." That night, the Velkari High Command held an emergency session. The footage had spread to 200 systems within hours, 3,000 by the end of the day. Humanity's introduction to the galactic stage would not be as victims or supplicants or irrelevant primitives. It would be as the species that defeated Vortex the Undefeated with friendliness, patience, and a well-timed trip. I filed my official report at 0300 hours, unable to sleep. In it I outlined new recommendations for human contact approach with caution, never underestimate their adaptability, and for the love of all that's sacred in the cosmos, do not engage them in prolonged conflict. Because here's what terrified me most, the realization that kept me awake while my homeworld spun through the darkness. Captain Lyra was an engineer who did casual training twice a week. She wasn't their best. She wasn't their champion. She was just someone who volunteered because no one else felt like getting up. What would their actual warriors be like? I pulled up Earth's military history files, something I should have done before the summit. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire existence, refining combat across thousands of years, in every possible environment their death world offered. They'd practiced war the way other species practiced art. And now they had space travel. The galaxy, I realized with the crystal clarity of absolute certainty, was about to become a much more complicated place. We'd spent millennia assuming that strength meant armor, claws, venom, or size. We'd built our entire military philosophy around physical superiority. Humans had just proven that the deadliest weapon in the universe was a brain that refused to quit, wrapped in a body that looked harmless enough to ignore until it was too late. I drafted one final memo to the Velkari Emperor, marked with the highest security classification, regarding Earth. We are not their superiors. We are not their equals. We are their learning opportunity. Recommend immediate diplomatic overtures, and for strategic purposes, We should probably try to be their friends. Because if this is what happens when one of them is being friendly, I have no desire to see what happens when they're not. The memo was approved within the hour. Somewhere on that little blue planet, I imagined Captain Lyra was back to calibrating engines, probably humming to herself, completely unaware that she'd just terrified half the galaxy. And that, more than anything, was the most human thing of all.